For decades, Beth Moore stood as one of the most recognizable voices in American Christianity. Her conferences filled arenas, her Bible studies reached millions of homes, and women across generations turned to her teachings during the hardest seasons of their lives. That is why her announcement in March of 2026 felt deeply emotional for so many supporters. In a quiet video shared online, she revealed that Living Proof Live, the ministry event platform she had built over nearly 30 years, would soon come to an end. Only a handful of events remained before the ministry scaled down permanently. While she carefully explained that this was not retirement, many people sensed something heavier beneath her words. Beth spoke openly about reducing her workload, simplifying her life, and entering a quieter season focused mainly on writing and smaller speaking engagements. Her comments carried the tone of someone preparing to close a significant chapter of life. Followers who had watched her preach with passion and energy for decades suddenly saw a woman who sounded reflective, tired, and emotionally weathered. For many longtime supporters, it felt less like a ministry update and more like the beginning of a farewell they never expected to hear so soon. A body that could no longer carry the weight. Behind Beth Moore's public decision to slow down was a private battle that had been intensifying for years. In 2024, her physical health reached a breaking point. What started as ordinary back pain gradually turned into a condition that affected nearly every aspect of her life. During a simple walk home, her spine suddenly gave out, leaving her struggling just to make it through the front door. She later described the experience in painful detail, explaining how every step became unbearable. For someone known for standing on stages before thousands of people, the image of her barely able to walk stunned many followers. The emotional impact became even more visible when she admitted that she had broken down in tears before her husband after years of trying to hide the pain. Eventually, doctors informed her that major spine surgery was unavoidable. The recovery process was slow, exhausting, and emotionally draining. Even after the first surgery, another major operation followed in 2025. Beth openly questioned how much suffering a person could endure in order to feel normal again. Her physical struggles revealed the reality many admired leaders often hide. Even the strongest public figures eventually reach limits their bodies can no longer overcome. The childhood trauma that shaped her entire life. Long before Beth Moore became a celebrated Bible teacher, she was a little girl growing up in a deeply troubled home in Arkansas. From the outside, her family appeared respectable and deeply connected to church life. Her father ran the local movie theater and held positions of trust in the community. Yet behind that public image existed a painful secret Beth carried for decades. In 2023, she publicly confirmed that she had been sexually abused by her father during childhood. The revelation shocked many listeners because it exposed the deep personal suffering hidden beneath her public ministry. Beth described the devastating confusion of watching the same man who harmed her also serve in church and receive admiration from the community. The emotional damage extended beyond the abuse itself. Her mother battled severe depression and struggled emotionally throughout Beth's childhood, creating a home environment filled with instability and fear. Church became the only place where Beth felt safe and protected. Those experiences deeply shaped her faith and eventually influenced her passion for helping hurting women. For decades, she buried those memories while building a successful ministry, but the trauma never disappeared. It remained part of the emotional burden she quietly carried throughout her entire adult life. How a church aerobics class changed everything. Beth Moore's rise to national influence did not begin in a seminary classroom or inside a famous ministry family. It began in a church aerobics class in Houston during the early 1980s. At the time, she was a young wife and mother simply trying to serve women in her local church community. Between workout sessions, she would share short devotionals and Bible lessons. What seemed small and ordinary at first slowly revealed an extraordinary ability to connect with people emotionally and spiritually. Her natural communication style immediately stood out because she spoke openly, passionately, and honestly about faith and personal struggles. Pastor John Bizagno of First Baptist Houston, noticed her gift and eventually encouraged her to speak publicly. Beth initially resisted because she believed women should remain under strict male authority in ministry settings. Yet something about that opportunity changed her perspective forever. As her women's Bible class grew, thousands began attending weekly sessions. Soon publishers and ministry leaders recognized that she possessed a unique ability to explain Scripture in ways ordinary women deeply understood. Her first major Bible study launched in the mid-1990s and quickly became a massive success. From that moment forward, Beth Moore's ministry exploded into one of the largest women's teaching movements in modern evangelical history, building an empire that reached millions of women. Once Beth Moore's ministry gained momentum, its growth became almost impossible to stop. Through Living Proof Ministries, she created conferences, books, devotionals, and Bible studies that reached women across the United States and eventually around the world. By 2015, her teachings had impacted more than 20 million people in multiple languages. Churches hosted her studies regularly, and many women viewed her teachings as life-changing spiritual guidance during seasons of grief, addiction, trauma, and family struggles. Her conferences often sold out massive arenas filled with mothers, daughters, grandmothers, and entire church groups traveling long distances just to hear her speak. What made Beth different from many other ministry leaders was her emotional honesty. She spoke openly about insecurity, suffering, and personal weakness, while still pointing listeners toward hope and faith. Supporters trusted her because she seemed genuine rather than polished. Financially, the ministry also became highly successful, with assets growing dramatically over the years. Yet despite all the influence and visibility, Beth still operated in a religious culture where many male leaders viewed women in ministry with suspicion. The larger her platform became, the more tension quietly developed between Beth Moore and parts of the conservative evangelical world that once celebrated her rise. The political moment that changed everything. For much of her career, Beth Moore avoided direct political conflict. She focused primarily on Scripture, spiritual growth, and personal healing, rather than partisan debates. That changed dramatically in October 2016, after the release of the Access Hollywood recording involving Donald Trump. Beth responded publicly on social media with emotional comments about the treatment women often experience in environments dominated by power and entitlement. Her words carried particular weight because she herself had survived childhood abuse. She made it clear that dismissing degrading comments about women as harmless clodentokdela deeply disturbed her. Many evangelical leaders and church members reacted with anger almost immediately. Some accused her of betraying conservative Christianity or aligning with liberal politics. Others demanded that publishers distance themselves from her ministry. Churches that had used her Bible studies for years reportedly returned or destroyed her materials in protest. The backlash stunned Beth because many of the harshest attacks came from religious communities she had faithfully served for decades. What began as a moral response to language about women slowly evolved into a major turning point in her relationship with the Southern Baptist world. The controversy revealed deep divisions inside evangelical culture about gender, politics, power, and loyalty, speaking against abuse. Inside the Southern Baptist Convention, as Beth Moore's relationship with conservative evangelical leadership deteriorated, another crisis was unfolding inside the Southern Baptist Convention. Investigations published in major newspapers revealed widespread sexual abuse cases involving hundreds of church leaders over several decades. The reports exposed devastating failures in accountability and protection for victims. Beth Moore responded with unusual boldness. Drawing from her own painful history, she openly criticized the culture that often minimized women's voices while protecting powerful men. During a major Southern Baptist gathering in 2019, she spoke publicly about what she described as a built-in disrespect toward women within the denomination. Her comments resonated strongly with abuse survivors who felt ignored by church leadership for years. However, critics accused her of attacking the denomination itself. Beth became increasingly frustrated watching leaders argue about whether women should preach while abuse scandals dominated headlines. To her, the priorities seemed completely misplaced. She later described feeling emotionally disconnected from a denomination she once loved deeply. The emotional toll of constantly defending herself while also advocating for survivors became overwhelming. What had once felt like a spiritual home increasingly felt hostile and exhausting. The tension continued growing until separation eventually became unavoidable. The public humiliation. That marked a breaking point. One of the most painful public moments in Beth Moore's ministry came in October 2019 during a conference appearance involving Pastor John MacArthur. During a discussion on stage, MacArthur was asked for his thoughts about Beth Moore. His response was brief but explosive: "Go home." The comment immediately spread across Christian media and social platforms, triggering fierce debate across evangelical circles. For many women, the statement symbolized years of dismissive attitudes toward female voices in ministry. Beth's response, however, surprised many people because she answered with restraint rather than anger. She calmly explained that she believed her calling came from God, not from human approval, and therefore she had no intention of abandoning the work she believed she was meant to do. Yet beneath her composed response, the moment clearly left deep emotional scars. Public criticism from strangers is painful enough, but rejection from fellow Christian leaders carried a different kind of wound. Beth had spent decades trying to navigate ministry spaces carefully, often minimizing herself to avoid conflict. The MacArthur incident exposed how little acceptance she truly had among certain influential leaders despite her decades of faithful work. Many observers believe that moment accelerated her eventual decision to step away from institutional evangelical culture, leaving the Southern Baptist world behind. By 2021, Beth Moore publicly acknowledged what many had already suspected for years. Her relationship with the Southern Baptist Convention had effectively ended. In interviews, she explained that she no longer recognized the denomination she once loved. The abuse scandals, political conflicts, hostility toward women, and constant criticism had created emotional distance she could no longer ignore. Around the same time, her longtime publishing partnership also ended, signaling another major shift in her ministry career. Beth and her husband eventually began attending an Anglican church, a move that triggered another wave of criticism from former supporters. Some accused her of abandoning biblical truth, while others viewed her transition as an understandable search for peace after years of conflict. For Beth, however, the decision seemed less about rebellion and more about survival. She had spent decades fighting for space inside systems that increasingly rejected her presence. Leaving those environments may have felt heartbreaking, but it also appeared necessary for her emotional and spiritual well-being. Why her decision to slow down makes perfect sense. When people first heard Beth Moore's 2026 announcement about scaling back her ministry, many immediately assumed it was simply about aging or retirement. But looking at the full story reveals something far more complex and emotional. This is a woman who spent decades carrying unimaginable personal pain while simultaneously leading one of the largest women's ministries in America. She survived childhood abuse, physical suffering, public criticism, institutional rejection, and intense political controversy, all while remaining under constant public attention. Few people could endure that level of emotional pressure without eventually reaching exhaustion. Her decision to simplify her life now appears less like surrender and more like wisdom. Rather than continuing to push herself physically and emotionally until complete collapse, she chose to step back intentionally, while still able to speak and write on her own terms. There is also a noticeable sense of reflection in her recent interviews, as though she has begun evaluating what truly matters during the final chapters of life. The massive conferences, endless travel, and constant public battles no longer seem worth the personal cost. After 30 years of giving nearly everything to ministry, Beth Moore appears ready to choose peace over performance. The legacy Beth Moore will leave behind. No matter what people think about Beth Moore's theology, politics, or ministry choices, her influence on modern Christian culture cannot honestly be denied. She changed the landscape for women in evangelical teaching by proving that millions would listen to a woman speak passionately and intelligently about Scripture. Long before conversations about abuse, trauma, and women's experiences became common in churches, Beth was already speaking openly about pain, insecurity, healing, and faith. Her honesty created space for countless women who felt unseen or silenced inside religious environments. Even many critics acknowledge the enormous impact she had on Bible study culture across America. At the same time, her story also reflects the deep tensions inside evangelical Christianity itself, particularly regarding power, gender, and authority. Beth Moore became both a beloved teacher and a controversial figure because she refused to stay silent when difficult issues emerged. Now, as she enters a quieter season of life, many supporters view her not as someone defeated, but as someone deeply wounded who kept moving forward despite extraordinary challenges. Whether she continues speaking publicly for years or eventually disappears from public life entirely, her story has already left a permanent mark on American Christianity and on millions of women who saw part of themselves in her journey.